Hello and welcome. This is James from the DSO Imager channel, and tonight I'm going to show you the workflow that I use to process my latest take on the Leo Triplet. The last time I targeted the Leo Triplet, I shot that with my 70mm refractor, an SV70T, and an ASI 178 mono, so older, very small CMOS, cooled CMOS camera. It was actually my first CMOS camera. This time I shot this target with my Astrotech AT115 EDT, so it's a 115mm refractor. I am using a 0.8 reducer, so this is giving me a focal length of around 644mm. The camera was the ASI 1600 mono. Total integration time for this shot is going to be a little bit over 20 hours. I got about 9.5 hours of luminance, and that's what you're seeing right here. This is just straight stacked. No processing on this at all. And then I got 11 hours worth of RGB combined. Now, one of my goals with this shot was to try and get as much of this tidal stream coming out of the Hamburger Galaxy to show up. I'm in Bortle 5 skies, and you can see there's an obvious gradient here. My skies to the east are where the main light pollution dome's at. So first we'll take a look at the channels. So this is the luminance, like I mentioned before. Here's our red channel, and the green, and the blue. So these are all looking pretty good. I used flats and darks, and yeah, I was pretty happy with how clean these came out. I had just taken a fresh set of flats right before I finished collecting data on this target, and it definitely shows. Alright, so one of the things that I've done before in the past, and I did on this image, is I actually stacked all of these together. So I stacked the lum, the red, and the green, and the blue all into a master luminance stack. And again, the goal was to see if I could pull out a little bit more of that tidal stream. So I first ran dynamic background extraction against all of them because stacking them, I didn't want to mess around with all these gradients. So there we go with the luminance after dynamic background extraction, pretty clean. And there's red. I mean, the red and the green were actually pretty good to begin with, but yeah, so they all looked fine, and then I just did an integration, and this is what it came out with. So, and this is what I use as a luminance. Now, if we compare it to just a straight luminance, I mean, did it help? Yeah, I mean, I think it did, at least on the tidal stream. You're definitely seeing a little bit more. I mean, it's still really faint. And I'll just kind of mention this now. I collected this, I stacked the data as I was going, and honestly, after 7 hours, 8 hours, I didn't see a whole lot of improvement in the Galaxies, right? I think I hit that point of diminishing returns. But the tidal stream was the main thing that I was trying to get, and so really I probably could have spent a little bit more time. Let's move this out of the way and do a quick comparison, right? So we got our regular luminance here on the right, and this is the integration. So I mean, this is what we're looking at here is 9.5 hours of just luminance, and this is 20 hours, a little over 20 hours of all the channels, luminance, RGB combined. Can't really see a whole lot. Let me reset this. What I'm doing here is screen transfer function. I'm just using the mouse wheel to zoom in on this K value, and I'm going to grab the center one and just pull it back a little bit. All right, so this is of course temporary. We're not actually changing anything on the image, but we're pulling this back just so I can see what this is, and I want to compare this between the two. So we got the same stretch now applied to both images, and again, the left is with the 21 hours of LRGB, all in a grayscale or luminance image, and the right is just 9.5 hours of straight luminance. And I mean, the difference is subtle. You can definitely see a little bit more detail in here. I suspect 20 hours of luminance would be better than 10 hours, 9 hours of the luminance and 11 hours of RGB, but you know, the difference again is probably not that much, but it gives you an idea. You know what? It's a little bit less noisy. There's definitely a little bit more noise here, so I just thought it'd be interesting to see this comparison. Alrighty, so let's see. After that, I did run dynamic background extraction again on the integration, right? The master loom, we'll call it, and then I start to stretch it. Now, usually I would use the Easy Processing Suite soft stretch, but this time I just decided to do a manual stretch. On Galaxies, the soft stretch tends to overexpose the galaxies a little bit, and then I'm having to use like masks and curves to pull them back. So this time I thought I would just try to do a regular histogram stretch, and you can see that here. And I ended up with this after stretching. Actually, I skipped a step. Before I stretched, let me bring this up here. Before the stretch, I did do a blur exterminator after DBE. And there, you can see that here. Alright, so, I mean, the main thing at this image scale is the impact on the stars. Here, we'll do the same thing. Oops, that didn't work. Let's give it a partial stretch so we can actually look at the galaxy and see the effects of blur exterminator. Alright. There. So Blur Exterminator did a pretty good job of sharpening that up. I don't know that it really gave us a whole lot more detail. Yeah, I guess it did. Blur Exterminator really works great on oversampled data. And I think my image scale with this setup is right at like 1.2 arc seconds, so we're kind of in that premium range or that ideal range, but we're not oversampled. But it did pretty good. And again, the big thing's the stars. Let's take a look at Hamburger. Yeah, I mean, it did a great job on those dust lanes in the center there. Pretty good. Alright, so, like I said, dynamic background extraction, then blur exterminator. I then made a clone of that, and which is this, and then I stretched it out. Alright, so now I did the same thing to the color. So I used LRGB combination tool, and I did run blur exterminator against it as well. And then this is me applying the manual stretch. So I mean, the color is not super strong yet, but I mean, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Alright, so after the stretch, I wanted to blur, and that's what we see here. And the blurring is what I do before adding the luminance to the color data. And usually I would use here, multi-scale median transform. But this time I actually just used noise exterminator, and I maxed out on the noise reduction, and I had no sharpening effects, and that gave us this. And then I applied the luminance, this master luminance. Now keep in mind the luminance did not have any noise reduction on it yet, so we are seeing some grain in there. And now we're doing star removal. Look at all these other galaxies. That's the coolest thing about star removal is it reveals all these hidden galaxies. I use Star Exterminator for the star removal. We can kind of get a better look at tidal stream here. So, I mean, it is really faint. For these Bortle 5 skies, I think it's going to be tough to really pull that out. I got enough of it though, I guess. Alright, and so now we're seeing some curves work. I am trying to darken the background while not pulling back on this. Basically what I'm doing is I'm just using curves. Right, and if you put your mouse pointer in here and hold, you can see where the background signal is at. And if I go here, you can see it move up a little bit. And so what I'm doing is I'm pulling back on curves like back here and then pulling it up where the tidal stream signal is at. But making sure that this doesn't go too high here because I don't want to blow the galaxy cores out. They're already bright enough. And so it's just really subtle curve work to try to introduce some separation between the tidal stream and the background. Alright, so we got a mask on there, and yep, just doing some general work on all the galaxies. I believe what's going on here is I'm just increasing the color saturation. And that would just be, again, with curves and just a little bit, very subtle here. Now, you see I got a preview here. I bet I got a mask that's focused on that galaxy, yes. And so what you're going to see here is that I created a mask for each individual galaxy and worked on them individually. And the reason for that is that they're different. Like this one's so much brighter than the other two. So if I just used a general mask that that protected everything except the 3 galaxies, and I kind of dialed the cores back to reveal more detail, this would still look blown out. So I really need to work on the galaxies individually, and that's what you're going to see here. So yeah, see what I'm doing is I'm pulling back on curves and increasing saturation. Now, there is an alternative way to do this, and it would be quicker because I wouldn't need to work on the galaxies individually. We could use HDR multi-scale transform. In fact, why don't I do that real quick and just kind of demonstrate what that does. Now, I do use this sometimes on larger galaxies. It's kind of it's pretty strong though. So the default here, let me set it to default. The default is 6 layers, and this right here is the primary lever or control that you're going to manage. You do want to put a check in to lightness, and you just put that in there, and there we go. So I mean, you can see it kind of instantly gave us the results, but I feel like it's a little, I feel like it has a tendency to overcook if you're not careful. So this time I did it manually, right? I mean, especially here, this M66, right? I think this is M66. It just looks a little overcooked to me with this. You can control this. Increase the number of layers, ironically, has a softer impact. Yeah, see that? See the difference there? Not as much. But, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes the results from this are good, sometimes they're not. Maybe I should experiment with them more, but I did it a more manual way. I just want to show this out there, that this is definitely an option. When I did some reprocessing of my galaxies recently, some older data, you may have seen some of that in the last video I posted. I did use HDR multi-scale transform, and it did a killer job on some of them. In fact, I may, at the end of this video, I may share my reprocess of M51, which I used the HDR multi-scale, and it did a great job. Alright, so anyway, let's forge ahead. Okay, so you can see I'm still doing some work on that Galaxy. Now we're moved over here to M66, right? This is M65, right? Anyway, there we go. And I mean, basically what I'm doing here is using the mask and just pulling back on curves, right? Because it's too much signal. So we're pulling back on curves. We're touching up saturation a little bit, and I'm probably hitting these with convolution, unsharp mask. There we go. Now we're on Hamburger and same kind of deal. Now here's a mask that I made just for the title stream. And you got to be really careful with these types of masks. Let me see. Do I have... Yeah, there it is. So basically what I did is I took the main mask that I had. Let's see if I can find... Yeah, this guy here. I took this into Photoshop, this mask right here, and this is just a standard range mask. And I use a brush, a white brush, to basically erase everything, including all these subtle little background areas. And I was very careful to try to leave the tail intact. There's actually more of it over there. And so I took this is the result of that. And the idea here is, again, to use curves to try and push this out. You got to be careful because, I mean, obviously this is a little artificial looking, right? I want to emphasize that title stream without making it look like it was forced. And so it was just some really subtle stretches with that mask. And you can see that there. Mostly looking at this brighter part of it. If I had pushed it too much, you would have seen the obvious mask lines, and it just wouldn't look right. Alright, so I got to this point. I made a clone because I wanted to deal with one other thing here. You see now there's kind of like a brightish spot here. Alright, this is the result of this star right here. So we've got the stars separate. I'm going to put the stars back in, and they're going to be nice and tight, but I don't want this kind of brightish area. I mean, you can barely notice it, but it'll give it an appearance as like almost like a halo. So here it is, and I just used clone stamp to basically stamp it out. So boom, gone. You zoom in, you can kind of see the outline of the clone stamp, but I think it's blended in a lot better now than it was before. Alright, so next was to work on the stars, and you can see them right here. They're already stretched, and we just need to do a little bit more work on them. And I'm basically just increasing saturation, and I wanted to pull more out, so I created a mask and kind of to block the brighter ones and do some work, push them out. Now there was something else that I had an issue with. Let me see. Let's go to that preview. Yeah, I wanted to reduce this halo. And that was just done with curves work. You can see. Basically, what I did is I pulled back on curves so that it would basically dial back the halo without dialing back the stars, which were brighter than the halo. Then I gave it some saturation, which you're seeing here. Inverting, that's just to kind of fix any kind of magenta stars that started to appear there. And I ended up with this. So I added the stars back in using pixel math. I did take this into Photoshop and I tweaked contrast and I tweaked the color a little bit, and this is what I ended up with. Make some space here. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with this. It's overall a clean copy of the Leo Triplet. Now, as promised, let me just show you that shot, that reprocess of M51. Remember, earlier in the video I had mentioned that HDR multi-scale transform was an option for really improving the contrast in the cores of Galaxies. And while I did not use that tool for this shot of the Leo Triplet, I did do it on this reprocess of M51. So let me pull that up really quick and show a comparison. Yeah. Alright, so on the left, okay, this is 3 years ago, the Celestron Edge HD8 with an ASI 1600 mono. So same camera that was used in this Leo Triplet. This is before I got that ZWO 294 mono. It's only like 11 hours worth of data. And the left is my first process of this 3 years ago. And the right is the reprocess that I did like a week ago. Same exact data, same 11 hours. So the big difference here, well, is a couple of things. So I used the HDR tool on this. I used Blur Exterminator on this. And then, of course, the benefit of 3 years worth of experience, of pixinsight experience on this. So pretty night and day. I mean, it does not even look like the same data, but it is. Alright, so there you have it. Leo Triplet and M51. Leo Triplet, of course, is the recent image. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this turned out, what you thought of my workflow, if you found it useful or not, and mention what targets you guys have been shooting this Galaxy season. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, I know our Southern Hemisphere astrophotography friends, they can shoot Milky Way year-round. But we get some cool galaxies that they don't get to see. So anyway, clear skies and good evening.